I never thought love would come with a price tag, but there I was, staring at a number so big it made my chest tighten. $1 million. That was the cost her father had named, without hesitation, without blinking, as though he was asking for the time of day. Please like this video and subscribe to my channel, thank you. The city lights blurred outside the restaurant's glass wall, a cascade of gold and silver melting into the night. My heart was steady, but my mind was restless. Tonight was supposed to be a milestone, the night I would finally sit across from Richard Hayes, the father of the woman I loved, and tell him my intentions. My name is Ethan Carter. I'm 29 years old, the kind of man who has had to build everything from scratch. I started with nothing, no family fortune, no influential last name. Just a second-hand laptop, endless nights of coding, and an idea that turned into a thriving tech company. That journey had taught me how to win battles, how to survive storms. But I had no idea that the storm sitting across from me would not be one of business, but of love. Richard's presence was the kind that could fill a room without a word. His sharp gray suit matched the steel in his eyes, and when he looked at you, it wasn't as a man meeting another man, it was as a predator sizing up his prey. The evening began politely enough. He asked about my business, my plans for the future, my family background. His questions were sharp, almost surgical, like he was dissecting my life to see what it was worth. Emily sat beside me, her hand lightly brushing mine under the table, a silent comfort against the cold formality of the moment. And then it came. No build-up, no hesitation, just a number spoken with absolute certainty. $1 million. That, he said, was the price for his blessing. Not a loan. Not an investment. A payment. The words seemed to echo in my head, louder than the clinking of glasses or the soft hum of the restaurant's piano. Emily's face froze, her smile slipping away as the meaning sank in. I didn't respond immediately. I just studied him, trying to understand if this was some kind of cruel joke, an old-fashioned test of worth, or if he truly believed love was something to be purchased. But his expression never wavered. In that moment, I realized this wasn't a conversation, it was a transaction. And Richard Hayes was a man who didn't deal in emotions. He dealt in power. The night ended without fireworks, without shouting. Just a quiet, suffocating tension. As I walked Emily home, her silence said everything. $1 million wasn't just a number, it was the wall he had built between us. And I had to decide whether I was going to climb it, or bring it crashing down. The city was quiet that night, but inside Emily's apartment, the silence was deafening. No music, no TV, just the faint ticking of the clock on her wall, each second stretching longer than it should. We sat on opposite ends of the couch, neither of us ready to speak first. Her eyes were fixed on the floor, her hands folded in her lap like she was holding herself together. I wanted to reach out, to pull her close and tell her we'd find a way through this, but the words wouldn't come. Every time I tried, I saw Richard's face in my mind, calm, calculating, certain that his demand would either break me or make me bow to him. Emily finally looked up, and for a moment I thought she was going to speak. But instead, she let out a long, heavy sigh and leaned back, her gaze drifting toward the ceiling as if searching for answers there. I could see the weight in her expression. This wasn't just about the $1 million, it was about what it meant. Her father had drawn a line in the sand, and crossing it would mean giving him power over us before we even began our life together. I wanted to ask her what she thought we should do, but deep down, I already knew. Emily loved me, but she also knew her father. He was a man who didn't make idle threats. If we tried to fight him head-on, he would make our lives unbearable. The air felt heavy, like we were both holding our breath. I reached over, resting my hand on hers. She didn't pull away, but she didn't squeeze back either. That small lack of response hurt more than I expected. It was as if she was already bracing herself for the possibility that I might walk away. In my mind, I kept replaying the dinner, hearing the sharp, unshakable tone in Richard's voice. It wasn't a request, it was an order. A test. A statement. Whatever it was, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was also a trap. That night, I left Emily's apartment without a plan, without even a promise. The streets were empty as I walked to my car, my thoughts swirling like storm clouds. One thing was certain, silence might have ruled that night, but it wouldn't last forever. I had to find a way to fight back. The next morning, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. If Richard Hayes wanted to play games, then I needed to understand the man behind the demand. $1 million wasn't just a number, it was a statement of power. And power leaves a trail. I started with the basics, public records, news articles, old interviews. Richard's name was everywhere. Oil investments in the Middle East, real estate acquisitions in Manhattan, corporate board positions. He wasn't just wealthy. He was entrenched in the kind of circles that thrived on influence and intimidation. But buried between glowing business profiles and charity gala photos were hints of something darker. Whispers of ruined partnerships, quiet settlements, and rivals who had mysteriously disappeared from the corporate scene. Nothing concrete, just shadows where the light never quite reached. By midday, I had called in favors from old contacts, people who had their own grudges against men like him. One friend from my early startup days, now working in corporate intelligence, sent me a discreet message. "Be careful. Hayes plays dirty." That was all he wrote. The more I dug, the more I realized Richard's life was a fortress built on secrecy. Offshore accounts, shell corporations, consulting fees paid to political figures. Every layer I peeled back only revealed another. And then I found something that made my stomach knot, a name buried in an old business registry: Thomas Graves. 10 years ago, Graves had been engaged to Richard's eldest daughter. The wedding never happened. The official story was that they mutually decided to part ways. But whispers in old financial circles told a different tale, something about a sudden debt, a deal gone wrong, and Graves disappearing overseas. The parallels to my own situation were too sharp to ignore. That night I couldn't sleep. The glow of my laptop screen lit the room as I scrolled through grainy photos, business filings, and news clippings. Every instinct in me screamed that Richard's $1 million demand wasn't just about me, it was part of a pattern. I was starting to see the shape of the game. And if I was right, then I wasn't just fighting for Emily. I was stepping into a battlefield where money wasn't the only weapon. It was raining that evening, the kind of cold, steady rain that makes the world feel smaller and heavier. I stood outside Emily's apartment for a moment before knocking, rehearsing in my head how I would tell her what I had uncovered. When she opened the door, her eyes were red. She'd been crying. I stepped inside, and the warmth of her living room did nothing to ease the chill in my chest. She didn't wait for me to speak. Instead, she sank onto the couch, curling into herself like she was trying to disappear. She told me she had confronted her father earlier that day. She had begged him to drop the ridiculous demand, told him how much she loved me, how wrong it was to treat our relationship like a business transaction. But his response had been cold, almost rehearsed. He had said that if I truly loved her, I'd prove it by meeting his price. If I couldn't, it meant I wasn't capable enough to protect her or give her the life she deserved. The words cut her deeper than she wanted to admit. She told me she felt like an object, something to be bought, owned, and passed from one man to another. Her voice cracked when she said she wasn't sure she could keep fighting both for me and against him. I sat beside her, trying to pull her close, but she pulled away slightly, not in rejection, but as if she needed space to breathe. I could see the war inside her, love for me tangled with loyalty to a father who had raised her but now stood as the biggest obstacle in her life. I wanted to tell her everything I had found about him, every shady deal, every whisper of corruption. But I held back. It wasn't the time. She didn't need another reason to resent him, she needed hope. That night, as I left her apartment again, the rain felt heavier. I realized something important: this fight wasn't just about the $1 million anymore. It wasn't even just about marrying Emily. It was about freeing her from the invisible chains her father had wrapped around her since childhood. But if I was going to win, I had to be careful. Very careful. For days the number haunted me. 1 million. A figure that could build a house, start a company, or change the course of someone's life, and now, apparently, decide the fate of my relationship. The truth was, I had the money. Not in cash lying around, but in company reserves, long-term investments, and personal savings I'd worked years to build. If I liquidated enough assets, sold some stock, and maybe took a loan against the business, I could meet Richard's demand. The thought crept into my mind late at night, when the weight of Emily's tears still lingered in my memory. Paying him would make it all go away. We could get married, start fresh, and leave his arrogance behind us. But that was the problem. Men like Richard Hayes didn't stop at the first payment. If I gave him $1 million now, what would stop him from asking for more later? A gift for the wedding. A loan for some business venture. Each request would come wrapped in the same poisonous smile. Still, the temptation was relentless. I'd catch myself running calculations in my head: how quickly I could gather the funds, how soon we could move forward, how relieved Emily would feel. One afternoon, I found myself staring at my company's financial dashboard. With a few clicks, I could have initiated the transfer. My finger hovered over the mouse, the reality of what that decision meant pressing down on me. And then I imagined it, Richard's smug expression when he realized I had caved. The quiet message it would send, That I could be bought, just like he thought. My stomach churned. I closed the laptop. The easy way would buy me Emily's hand, but not her freedom. And it wouldn't buy me respect, least of all my own. I knew then that if I was going to win this, it had to be on my terms. Not through a transaction, but through something that would shatter Richard's illusion of control. The easy way was off the table. Now, all that was left was the hard way. The decision not to pay brought clarity, but also danger. If I wasn't going to give Richard Hayes what he wanted, I needed something far more valuable than money, leverage. I began where I had left off in my earlier research, but this time, I went deeper. I wasn't just looking for dirt, I was looking for pressure points. The kind of information that could make a man like Richard think twice before crossing me. My company's security division, originally built to protect against corporate espionage, became my greatest asset. With a few quiet calls and encrypted messages, I had a small team combing through years of Richard's business records, property filings, and foreign investments. The picture that emerged was exactly what I suspected: a network of hidden accounts, front companies, and payments routed through places where financial law was more suggestion than rule. But money wasn't his only vulnerability. There were patterns: campaign donations tied to controversial legislation, property deals that displaced entire neighborhoods, and partnerships with businessmen whose reputations were, let's just say, less than clean. It was like pulling at a single thread and finding the whole suit unraveling. Every day, I pieced together more of the puzzle, creating a file that was both a shield and a sword. I didn't tell Emily. Not yet. If she knew, she'd try to stop me, not out of loyalty to her father, but because she knew the kind of retaliation a man like him was capable of. I told her I was working on something, and left it at that. The hardest part was pretending in public. We still saw Richard at family gatherings. I shook his hand, smiled when spoken to, and played the role of the polite young man trying to win approval. He thought he was watching me sweat, watching me slowly crack under his deadline. In reality, I was tightening the noose. The plan wasn't just to meet his demand, it was to remove it entirely. To put us in a position where he would be the one asking for my silence, not my submission. It was a dangerous path, but I had already decided, if Richard wanted a war, I would give him one. From the outside, nothing had changed. Emily and I still visited her parents for Sunday dinners, still smiled for family photos, still played our parts in the performance Richard demanded. But behind the curtain, I was building something dangerous. I learned quickly that the key to dismantling a man like Richard wasn't speed, it was patience. Men who thrived on intimidation expected immediate resistance, emotional outbursts, visible defiance. They didn't know how to handle quiet, methodical opposition. So I gave him nothing to read. I was polite, even deferential, letting him think the pressure was wearing me down. Meanwhile, my nights were spent in the glow of my laptop, reviewing encrypted files and piecing together the web of his operations. Offshore transfers through Belize. Shell companies in the Cayman Islands. Political donations to figures later implicated in scandals. It was all there, buried in layers of paperwork that only looked legitimate to the untrained eye. The deeper I went, the clearer it became: Richard's wealth wasn't just the result of shrewd business deals. It was built on calculated exploitation, on manipulating systems and people to his advantage. Every discovery made me more certain that I couldn't just marry Emily and move on. I had to dismantle his hold on her entirely. There were moments I almost slipped. At one dinner, Richard made a smug comment about men who overestimate themselves, and my jaw tightened so hard I thought my teeth might crack. But I smiled, raised my glass, and let him think his words had landed. Emily noticed my composure. More than once, she asked how I was handling everything so calmly. I told her I was just taking things one step at a time. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth. Every step I took was calculated to lead to a single moment, a moment when Richard Hayes would realize that the man he'd tried to control now had the power to destroy him. The waiting was the hardest part. I wanted to move, to strike, to end it. But I knew if I acted too soon, I'd lose everything I'd been building. So I kept playing the long game, smiling in the daylight while sharpening my blade in the dark. 3 months had passed since the dinner that changed everything. I thought I was the one controlling the timeline, slowly weaving my net tighter around Richard. But I underestimated him. One afternoon, I received a message from Emily: "My father wants to see you tonight." The moment I stepped into his office, I knew this wasn't a casual meeting. The blinds were drawn, the air was heavy with the scent of expensive cologne and something sharper, anticipation. He didn't offer me a seat. Instead, he stood behind his massive mahogany desk like a judge ready to deliver a verdict. He told me, in a tone that carried no room for misunderstanding, that the deadline was almost up. If I didn't produce the $1 million within the next 2 weeks, he would tell Emily that I had been wasting her time. He'd frame me as a man chasing her for connections, someone too weak to rise to the occasion. And then he added the final twist of the knife: if she didn't leave me willingly, he'd cut her off entirely. No financial support. No access to family asset. He said it like it was an act of mercy, as though he'd be helping her seriality. I didn't respond right away. I simply looked at him, the image of the file I'd been building flashing in my mind. Every document, every bank record, every buried deal. The weight of it felt heavy in my pocket, though it was safe on encrypted drives far from here. For a split second, I saw it, the life he wanted for me if I refused. Emily torn between love and survival, me cast as the reckless dreamer who'd let her fall. And worst of all, him walking away victorious, untouched. When I finally left his office, the air outside felt different. Not lighter, sharper. This wasn't a game anymore. He was pushing me into a corner, trying to force me to either give in or lose everything. But what he didn't realize was that he'd just given me the perfect reason to stop waiting. The long game was over. The next move would be mine. And when it came, it wouldn't be a payment. It would be a reckoning. I chose my moment carefully. It had to be somewhere Richard couldn't hide behind his public persona, somewhere he would feel the full weight of what I was about to show him. I called him and requested a private meeting at his office. My voice was calm, almost casual, but underneath it was a tension I knew he could sense. He agreed without hesitation, probably assuming I was finally coming to surrender with the $1 million in hand. When I arrived, I carried a single black folder under my arm. Richard sat back in his leather chair, smirking as if he had already won. I didn't bother with pleasantries. I placed the folder on his desk and slid it toward him. He opened it, and his smirk faltered. Inside was everything. Bank statements showing funds funneled into offshore accounts. Property transfers to shell companies. Political donations tied to corrupt officials. Even photographs, grainy, incriminating images of meetings that were never meant to be public. Every page was a nail in the coffin of his carefully constructed empire. I told him, in an even, measured tone, that copies of this file were stored in multiple secure locations. One email from me, and the contents would be sent to federal investigators, journalists, and certain business rivals who would relish the opportunity to take him down. He tried to play it off at first, flipping through the pages with feigned disinterest, but I could see it in his eyes, the calculations, the fear creeping in at the edges. He wasn't used to being cornered. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't threaten. I simply told him the truth. I wasn't paying him a cent, and if he continued to stand between me and Emily, the file would go public. His fortune, his influence, his reputation, it would all burn. The silence between us was suffocating. Richard closed the folder slowly, as though the weight of it had finally registered. He didn't make eye contact when he spoke, only muttered that he would reconsider his position. I left his office without looking back. My heart was pounding, but not from fear, from the knowledge that for the first time, Richard Hayes was no longer in control. The game was over. The call came the next morning. Emily's voice was brighter than it had been in months. Her father had told her he'd changed his mind, and that he would no longer stand in the way of our relationship. He didn't give her a reason, just the kind of vague, dismissive statement a man like him uses when he wants to avoid explaining himself. Emily was overjoyed. I let her believe it was a sudden change of heart. She didn't need to know about the file, the late nights, or the quiet war I had waged against her father. I wasn't protecting Richard, I was protecting her. I didn't want her image of him to shatter completely, even if mine had long since been destroyed. 2 weeks later, under a sky streaked with gold and fading blue, I slipped a ring onto her finger. There was no shadow over the moment, no silent conditions hanging between us. For the first time, I felt like our future was ours alone. Richard attended the engagement party. He shook my hand, his grip firm but lacking the arrogance it once held. His eyes flickered with something I couldn't quite place, resentment, perhaps, or grudging respect. We exchanged polite words, but underneath them was an unspoken truth. He knew, and I knew, exactly why he had backed down. The following months passed in a way I had almost forgotten was possible, peacefully. Emily and I planned our wedding without interference. I went back to my work, but the experience had changed me. I had seen firsthand how love could be tested, not by distance or circumstance, but by power and pride. Looking back, I realized the $1 million demand had never really been about money. It had been a weapon, a way for Richard to assert dominance and decide my worth. But in the end, I hadn't needed to buy his approval. I had taken it from him, not through a transaction, but through patience, strategy, and the refusal to bend. On the night before our wedding, I stood alone on the balcony, the city lights shimmering below. Emily was asleep inside, peaceful, unaware of the quiet war that had cleared the path for us. And in that moment, I knew one thing for certain: love is worth fighting for, but only if you fight on your own terms. Please like this video and subscribe to my channel. Thank you.